85 years ago, this coming September the 3rd, the world was thrown into darkness, not because of lack of electricity, but because the Germans and the British could not get together and find an equilibrium to hold peace. In England, the suffering was immense because men and women sent their sons and daughters off to battle, never knowing whether they were going to come back again. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our new guest, Michael, this is just my view of the situation. It's not historical, it's some factual, but hopefully it'll strike a chord. When war was declared, my parents were not married at the time. They were sent to the country, as a lot of children who were living in big cities were sent out to the country because their parents thought they would be safe out there because there were no buildings or manufacturing or anything that looked ominous. So they were sent, but they didn't know if they were ever going to come back and see their parents again. It was a very traumatic time. If you've seen films like The Darkest Hour, The Battle of Britain, and a lot of these other war stories, they kind of paint a pretty picture. Saving Private Ryan is another one, but it wasn't a pretty picture for the British. And I can only tell the story from that side. Rationing was very severe. Food was at a shortage. When I went to my grandmother's house way after the war, there was still a ration coupon book in her larder, along with cans of food that she bought in the 1940s. It was devastation everywhere. It was not a time. In fact, my grandfather, my mother's father, had a business in a place called Deptford, which was near where boats would dock. And underneath the floor on one side of the store, it was still there in the 70s, was a trap door. And in those days, the store ran 6 feet length with a door to the right as you looked at it, and it was about 6 feet tall, and it had shutters. When the alarm signals went off, the sirens, they would open up the trap door, go down, pull it down, and there was plenty of space. It was about as much space as there is in this room for people to sit there, and they would wait and listen for the sirens to finish. The war is a devastating thing. And to put it in perspective, Russia lost 24 million men, women, and children, of which 14 million of those were citizens. Think about that. That was 17% of their population at the time. The Chinese lost almost 20 million. The Germans lost 7.5 million. The Poles lost 5.5 million. America lost 418,000 men and women in the Second World War. Put in perspective, they lost 58,000 men and women in the Vietnam War. Just think about that for a minute. 70% of the deaths that happened in the Vietnam War were a portion of what happened in the Second World War. And of course, the British lost over 450,000 men, women, and children. A lot of civilians. The recovery process took long. In fact, the British government borrowed loans from America after the war to rebuild the infrastructure of England. About 15 years ago, they paid everything back, which ran into millions and millions and into billions of dollars. War's a terrible thing. It doesn't solve anything other than manufacturers get to test out whether or not their ideas work, and men, women, and children are commanded to do whatever. And we've seen it, especially over the last few years. But today is VE Day. VE Day was the signing of the Declaration for Peace, where the German High Command went to General Eisenhower and they formally signed the Treaty for Peace. I think it was signed at 11:45 in the morning, and at 12:01 peace was now the law of the world. And in that time, They went through everything. 330,000 men almost lost their lives in Dunkirk, which was a entire British army, until Churchill came up with the idea of actually forming a civilian armada, over 800 boats, small, little, and large, to bring those men back from the beachhead. Probably the largest armada ever constructed in the world to save the British Army. Think about that for a moment. Civilians saved the British Army, but normally army saves civilians. And quite frightening. If you've seen the movie Mrs. Miniver, in the movie her husband disappears for 4 days, and she can't figure out where he is. And he comes back, and she says, well, where have you been? He says, I can't tell you, I got to take a rest. But he's covered in dirt, and his boat looks like it's been through the grist mill backwards. It's pretty horrifying for anything. So as a kid growing up, I never really understood where my grandfather made his money. See, he had jewelry shops, and one day I found he had books like this, the daily receipts. You have to understand, there were 240 pennies to a pound back in the day, before 1971 and the common market and the change of devaluation of the pound. So 5 shillings was 60 pennies. And he would sell watches for 5 shillings. He would sell a ring for 10 shillings. That was 120 pennies. And pennies were about this size. And a £1 back in the day bought you quite a bit of food: eggs, butter, milk, cheese, bread, other essentials. And for £2, your family could eat for a whole month. And it was pretty good. But those that are still alive from the war today, not very many. In fact, last week, a gentleman by the name of Fred Geacock was 105 years old. Wow. He was the last flyer, flew and fought in the Battle of Britain. 105 years old. Now, have you seen the movie that describes how the Spitfire was made? That's what saved Britain. But what really saved Britain was not the Spitfire, it was the Hurricane plane, which was a much larger plane, less agile. But in the Battle of Britain, over 1,700 German planes were shot down, to the loss of about 250 British planes. Keep that in perspective. 250 planes, that's 250 flyers that were learning 4 or 5 weeks of training, and they were out there trying to shoot planes down against German flyers that have been able to do it for a lot longer. In the movies, war is dramatized and made to look glorified, but it isn't. There's no way that it becomes a glorified thing. So in England and in Europe, up and down, VE Day is celebrated, and today is the day. It's 80 years. I'd like to read you a poem that was written a while ago by a lady by the name of Deborah Flynn. And in the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of the winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and the warmth of summer, we will remember them. In the rustling of leaves and the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we have to share, we remember them. I could ask you to please stand. Mr. Toastmaster.